Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, everyone, depending on where you're joining us from. My name is Angela, and I'd like to welcome you to today's session, The Promises and Pitfalls of Market Insights Platforms, with Scott Litman, co-founder of Lucy. Couple of points before we begin. The webinar is being recorded, and the recording will be made available to you after the webinar. You can ask questions during and also at the end of the session by sending them through the questions widget. So our webinar platform has a couple of functions which I'm just quickly going to walk you through. Looking at the slide, number 1 shows you where you can send your questions, so the Q&A widget. Number 2 is where you can see the slides, of course. And number 3 are a group of widgets. Now, these widgets offer you the chance to interact with fellow webinar attendees through the group chat, or to interact with the platform and the content. Just click on the icons and see what happens. The platform is designed for you to get everything you can out of our time together, so experiment, have a little fun. Right, without further ado, let me introduce you to Scott, who is an entrepreneur in search of new ways technology can advance the mission of organizations. Today, Scott is the co-founder of Lucy, which helps enterprise teams make the most of their data. Built for the Fortune 1000, she reads, listens, watches, and learns all of the data that you share with her. It's a one-stop AI-powered knowledge platform for all the data you own and license. She was shaped by the needs of our clients, and she continues to evolve with the market. Lucy exists to amaze, delight, and empower knowledge workers. So with that, Scott, over to you.
Thank you, Angela. Those are some of my favorite words. And thanks for having us today. I am Scott Litman, co-founder of Lucy. Just a bit of background on my company. We are headquartered in Minneapolis, Minnesota. We have offices in New York and India. We have built a market insights platform in Lucy that is now in her 3rd generation. And today we serve many, many thousands of users from Fortune 1000 organizations, as well as agencies that service them from across the globe. And so with that, I have had the good fortune over the last 20 years to work with some of the world's biggest brands on the adoption of new technology. And I've thankfully learned a thing or two on that journey. Today, we're talking about market insight platforms. And as a matter of perspective, before the pandemic, we were already seeing great momentum building for the promise of these insight engines. The vision being to create the one-stop shop for knowledge, create an environment where all of the owned and licensed data of the enterprise was not only available to everyone in research, insights, and marketing, but ultimately could be found when it was needed. Now, then the pandemic hits. And we're not just working in offices around the globe. And that has proven to be an accelerant to the growth of this area and the adoption of these tools, because there's an even greater need for automation and ultimately find ways to work to support people working from home. But for all the momentum building in the industry for these solutions, there are pitfalls that we need to be aware of. And so today we will cover 3 distinct themes: the journey, the user story, and automation versus curation. And so we'll start with the path to adoption. And the first is really a perspective. Technology adoption is about more than the technology. And I can think that probably most of us have been a part of the big RFP process at some point for whatever the technology platform is. And a lot of time goes into reviewing vendors, doing Q&As, having people fill out giant forms, reviewing them, scoring them, and ultimately picking the technology. And in some cases, later on, it doesn't prove to work. And the thing is, the real work doesn't stop at the end of the RFP. In fact, the RFP is just the warm-up phase. It's just the preamble. And the next phase, the deployment phase, the work doesn't stop there either. That is just getting to the starting line of the race. The real work is ultimately the adoption, the journey for adoption that happens after deployment. And when we think about that, it's not just about the technology. technology adoption has three critical dependencies: people, processes, and content. So for example, in this case, we're talking about these market insight platforms. And if the content doesn't exist to support the needs of the user, it won't work. If we think about the people equation or a dependency is everything from the mentality of the individual to be willing to learn a new system, all the way up to the leadership vision or mandates that drive adoption. And then there's a process dependency, and processes are everything from that RFP process to how do we work with data and security, how do we ingest content, how do we handle training, onboarding, adoption, and support. And so these dependencies are so strong that an okay technology, but with great support of people, processes, and content, is probably going to be pretty successful. And the converse is that an amazing piece of technology will fail without the support of people, processes, and content. So something to think about as we look at this specific area of technology, although it's an evergreen story, it relates to all technology adoption. Now, the other piece is that adoption is a journey. And the journey is one that is both for the individual as well as the organization. At the individual level, we need to think about each person's journey. Everything from there is going to be the introduction that this is coming, to the scheduling of the training session, initial training, initial fumbling around and experience of trying to use whatever the new system may be, to having the aha moments of, I get it, this is great, to the drive to proficiency and ultimately becoming a power user. And so within an organization, each individual is going on their particular journey. And then separately, the company itself has a journey. The journey is initial beta users or early waves of users coming into the system as training rolls out to different teams, divisions, departments, and groups. And there is a level of organizational competence that occurs that is the manifestation of all those different individual journeys that are ideally being driven and pushed along by the company. And on the right here, I have a graph, and it's one that we like to use, and we've seen very, very similar patterns in many of our customers, where you can see in those early months that there's the initial trial and rollout and experimentation, and then you can see the spike. And the spike that's on, month 6, has occurred because either there was a leadership announcement, maybe there was in the past, there could have been an in-person event, or today a virtual event, but something that maybe there's a special project or need that creates this escalation in short-term burst of usage. And then you see after that, it drops off. But the new norm is greater than what preceded it. And then you see a few months later, there's the next event. And whether it's, again, a project or something that's manufactured like leadership communications or events, that has that effect. And so the perspective really is that adoption is a journey. We don't just turn these things on and immediately get 100% of the benefit. And these statements are true of market insight engines, but they're also true of just technology adoption. And so it's a perspective to have so that people have realistic expectations and also spend the time thinking about how important that journey is and make sure there's the proper support for it. So now the next piece is the user story. And we need to understand who we are building the system for to help us make sure we know what we're hoping to achieve. And so we're going to start with a user story, and I'd like to introduce you to Jenna. Jenna is an insights professional at a Fortune 1000 multinational. And today, she works from home, but someday she hopes to be back in the office. Whether it's full-time or hybrid, I guess we'll find out. But today she has her new assignment. She's going to work on the Q2 marketing plan or a strategy project, but she's got her new task in front of her, and she needs to find audience and segmentation data, past performance reports. She needs to conduct third-party research. She needs access to the media reports and the latest surveys and studies. And the challenge for Jenna is, where do I start? If you are like Jenna and you look at your browser and see 20 tabs open, representing all the different tools and places you can go for data, that is the is state for the insight professional. And so some of the most valuable data is going to be the data inside of the company. And whether you've got Box or Dropbox or SharePoint or OneDrive or Office 365, there are a myriad of places where data exists. whether it's legacy brand data, competitive intelligence, brand perceptions, attitudinal studies, whatever. You've got different places where data lives. And there may be thousands or tens of thousands or millions of pages of content, ultimately, that have been generated by all of your peers and predecessors. And then typically we have subscriptions to some of these wonderful vendors like a Global Web Index or an Insider Intelligence or a Mintel or a Euromonitor. And then we also have tools, whether it's dashboards and Tableau, whether it's great tools like Knowledge Hound for being able to find surveys and studies, or the vendors like Zappy and Black Swan and others in the industry that we rely on. So the challenge for Jenna is, do I open 20 tabs? Do I go into 20 systems? Where do I go? So she decides, I'm going to ask a friend, a peer, anyone who will listen. She gets on Teams or Slack or whatever the communications tool of the day is, and she looks for help. Now, she might get some tidbits back, maybe even some good help, but maybe people are getting messages and they're so busy with their stuff, they don't see it, they don't think it's for them. And at the end of the day, she still has an absolute ton of work in front of her. And so we have seen multiple studies across different Fortune 1000 companies that have looked at research and insights, and they have found that over 10% of the time each week is being consumed by people looking for data and generally not finding it. And if we think about how could we optimize that, what could we do with that time for ourselves? And as a company, what could we do if all of our people were spending that 10% not on just trying to look for information, but could spend intellectually on what to do with that information, what to do with that data so they can be more effective in their role. And so for Jenna, wouldn't it be great if she had a tool she could go to, a one-stop shop that would query all of those different systems, all of the file repositories where data lives, the data her company owns, or the data her company licenses. And this is the realm of the Market Insights platform. And I am going to show you just what that looks like. So I can only show you mine. So I'm going to share screen here. And there we go. So this is Lucy. And Lucy is a cloud-based multi-tenant software as a service. I can only show you my Lucy, which is connected to my company's Dropbox and vendors like Global Web Index and Knowledge Hound and Insider Intelligence that my Lucy's connected to. But for our customers, theirs is connected to the data they own or the data they license. So I'm going to ask Lucy a question. How do people listen to podcasts? So maybe we're thinking that podcasts is going to be part of this strategy, this rollout. And I just want to see what is the latest stuff we have. And so a couple quick things in the top left, we'll zoom in and see, the question, the way that we interact with the system. How do people listen to podcasts? Lucy is a system of natural language processing and natural language understanding, which just means you talk to her. If the question would make sense to one of your colleagues, it's going to make sense to Lucy. We're going to see that with these insight platforms, we're going to get answers back from a variety of sources. So I can see here that there's a survey or a study out at Knowledge Hound. We can see that there's a podcast on Who Listens to Podcast off at Insider Intelligence. I can see in my company's Dropbox there's a video. Curious what that might have. I can see here that from a different folder in Dropbox, there is another study. I've got an IAB report in my Dropbox. I've got a Global Web Index report, so a third-party study. And so what Lucy's doing is in one snapshot, I'm seeing that she has searched a variety of the systems she's connected to, as well as a variety of other ones because they didn't have the answers. And she's elevated by her confidence those best answers. If I click into one of these like Global Web Index, I see this is pretty interesting. I might think, well, what else does Global Web Index have? And I'll also highlight one other quick thing first. When we bring data in, everything has been tagged. So when I open up this more information, I can see that at the answer unit level, every piece of content has been automatically tagged by the system with taxonomies, concepts, and keywords. And I'll show how that plays in just a second. And so let's take a look and say, well, what happens if I was just asking this, how do people listen to podcasts? But I'm going to limit it to a source like Global Web Index. And when I hit apply to this filter, I've now taken this question and narrowed it from all of my sources, which I've got about 40 connected to this, Lucy, and I'm taking it down just to global web index. And I see, all right, they've got great stuff. And then I think, well, we're doing a campaign in the UK. So I wonder what we've got in the UK. And I can go over here and I can look at my content filters that are based on the metadata. And I can see what information's been tagged. I might even guess, is there anything in the United Kingdom? And so when I pick that as a filter, I've now gone from this big casting the net on who listens to, how do people listen to podcasts, to only the global web index data, to now even the really minute needle in the haystack, which is global web index, but UK only. And so this is just a very, very brief look at how these systems work, just to give you kind of a sense of all of that if you haven't seen one of these in the past. So with Jenna in mind, and thinking about the availability of a insights platform like this, we next want to think about, well, what are our goals? It's not just a build it and they will come. And as much as it's great when there's the vision to say we need to do this, we can identify what are the important goals that drive why should we implement one of these systems? Why should we put the effort into driving adoption? And so these are just a small set of the goals that we see in different companies, but it's everything from, avoiding redundant research. If you think about a global company where there's hundreds of insight professionals and thousands of marketers, all that have been creating content, is it possible that what I'm working on today has already been worked on by a colleague? How would I know that? And if I could find that the work already exists rather than reinventing the wheel, how much time and money could I save for my company? So a goal we might see is avoiding redundancy. Increasing utilization of tools and subscriptions. It is amazing the quality of data from these vendors, whether it's a Mintel, Euromonitor, Insider Intelligence, GWI, the tools that people have. But are they used as much as they could be? Is everybody getting full utilization? So one of the goals might be, how do we increase utilization of these tools and subscriptions? In that example you saw just a moment ago, I saw data come from 5 different locations. I may not have realized that Insider Intelligence had something great. I might not have realized there was a study at Knowledge Hound, but because I have an insights platform, I now realize I should go down that well and look. Increase use of historic data. A friend of mine built a data storage company for the enterprise and sold it to Dell a few years ago. And I was sharing what we work with, and he came back to me after and told me they manage the data of a large number of Fortune 1000s, and they said that their statistics showed that for unstructured data, all the PowerPoints, PDFs, Word documents that are in the enterprise, that after 90 days, 95% of them will never be opened again. So you think about all the great strategy decks and planning decks and summary reports and studies that we've all worked on, and to think that all the energy we put into them, and they're never going to be opened again. And it's not that the data isn't good. It's that people don't know it exists. And when I say people, I mean, yeah, you might have the people on your team, but what about the person in the department or brand or team next door on a different floor, a different geography, or today from a different home? So how can we increase use of that historic data? The drive for efficiency and saving time. If we are losing 10% of our working time, can we get that back, and can we put it to better functions? And if I had that time back, could I put it to creating better outcomes? And so these are just a few examples of the kinds of goals that we see. And so with those goals in mind, the next piece is building the user story. Because if I know what those goals are, I can work on then what is the data that supports the goal? What is the ROI model that we need to put in place? What are the critical success metrics? How does this feed into training, communications planning, and everything needed to support the justification of the platform and ultimately adoption? And this is something that we are learning every day, how to help customers on this journey, building new ROI models and helping with the process of creating these templates for them. And it ends up having a profound impact to not just buy because others, but to know why and to really craft the story, to know who your Jenna is. Now, the last theme I'm going to hit on is automation versus curation. If we buy into the vision that a one-stop shop for knowledge makes sense, then we need to think about that key dependency that is content and how we make it available to people. And a big point of differentiation between these systems is ultimately those that rely on uploading and curation versus automation. What we have seen in the industry is most of the platforms focus on the idea of uploading and curation. In fact, I've seen that they have really great interfaces for how am I going to upload, prepare content, tag content, and get it into the system. And there is a great case for why to upload. There's the old adage of garbage in, garbage out. The system's only as good as the data available to it. And there is a desire to have control of what goes in. But there are pitfalls that come with this approach. The typical enterprise has, in the Fortune 1000, has millions of pages of content across tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of documents. And it is an overwhelming task to think about the need to review and curate and tag all of that information. And so we have interviewed users of these systems, and we can see, and some of their quotes are here on the page. But the themes that we have seen most are the amount of time to review, curate, and upload all of the initial content to go into the system is significant. And this consumes valuable people time, and it extends the timeline for deployment significantly. But it's not just about setup. This tax on time is put onto every content creator, everybody who creates a report, a plan, a study, the next PowerPoint, the next PDF, the next Word document. It's on them typically to upload, tag, prepare the data to go in the system. And so there's an ongoing tax. So for a system that's there to drive efficiency, we're putting a lot of time into just getting data into the system. And then there's another consequence that we keep hearing about, which is that people worry about, they say, well, I'm busy with my day job. I don't have time to do this. And if I don't have time to do this, are my peers doing it? And if my peers aren't universally doing it, can I trust all of the data in the system? Do I know that all the latest and greatest stuff is there? And it creates a lot of apprehension and concern that ends up being an inhibitor to adoption. So we think of this in a different way. We believe that the most time-consuming and labor-intensive parts of these systems can be replaced with automation. I mean, after all, the whole idea of automation is to replace manual, labor-intensive tasks. And so we approach ingestion as being fully automated. We believe it's dramatically faster to set up these systems when the task is identifying where are the buckets that data lives, and then use automation to ingest all of that data. Now we tie into security so people only get what they need to see, and we tie into business rules so that those use cases are lined up to which buckets for which users. But we can connect terabytes of data and ingest it in days or weeks on initial ingestion, and then just ongoing make that automation work. So there is no hand picking of documents to go in. And the other thing is, once these buckets or volumes, whether they're SharePoint sites or OneDrive or Office 365 or Box or Dropbox or wherever data lives, once they are connected because they've been identified to that business case, to that user story, then they're always connected. So when somebody's working on version 5 of the quarterly report and they save it today, the system becomes aware and reads, learns, and listens and learns that content. And when version 6 is saved tomorrow, the same happens. And nobody consciously thinks about, did I move it into the Insights platform? With automation, it is just there. And then as you saw in the demo, the system has already done all of the hard work of tagging the data and giving us benefit for that. So our theme is let the AI do the hard work of ingestion and tagging and ultimately learning the content and doing it with technology to serve the needs of the user and to drive the greatest efficiency. So ultimately, there is a fundamental choice at the onset to determine if you're going to automate ingestion or curate it. And so that covers, in the time available, in the 20-ish minutes we've got, 3 of the key themes that we look at. Really just a perspective on the journey, a thought about the user story, and then this theme of how content gets into the system. I think that gives us a little bit of time for Q&A.
It certainly does. Thank you so much, Scott. That was fascinating. We have a few questions which have already come in. But of course, everyone, if you'd like to send us a question, then please feel free to do so through the Q&A widget. So let me start with our first question from, and I'm afraid I may be pronouncing your name incorrectly, so my apologies, Sundararaman, who's asking whether the platform is an in-house platform, or is it leveraging another AI platform, for instance, IBM Watson?
Right. So Lucy is uniquely a creation of our company, Equals 3. We have 4 patents that have been, actually 3 that have been issued and 1 being issued. We do leverage some components and APIs that are out there. So we certainly work with a little bit of some Watson technology, some Microsoft technology, and others. The system is entirely cloud-based. But one of the important things is that while we are a multi-tenant cloud-based SaaS, the data always lives in your platform. And from a security standpoint, we approach Lucy like she's just another user or contractor with access. But the data stays and is secured and remains in your systems and platforms.
Thanks. Another question from Dus. What have you seen are the key success criteria for a successful implementation of Lucy?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's making sure that we nail the dependencies, that the people, processes, and content, they all come together. And really, it's all the stuff we just covered. If we have the support of the people, processes, and content, if we have the user story mapped out, if we look at user adoption as a journey and work towards it, we have a customer that really is it's the role model. They now have monthly workshops. They're approaching 1,000 users. They'll have monthly workshops where people will compare notes and ask questions, and we get over 100 people that attend. We've got executive leadership that puts out messages every 2 months just to say, this is, we've adopted Lucy. This is what I expect from you. They run contests and incentives at the front end when they're training people to get them excited and make sure that they lean in successfully. They have the user persona. People know, that's me. I want to get that 10% of my life back. They celebrate their heroes. And so all these things come together. It's something that we've built a user adoption playbook. And I'll say for customers on the line, if you haven't seen it in 3 months, let's come back and do it again, because we keep revising it, refining it as we learn more from our customers and their experiences. And we use that as a bit of a guidepost to help our customers manage the journey.
Great. We have another question from Ezra, who's asking, what if all departments want to use the platform? So not just the insights team. Are there any limitations?
No. We have started with research and insights as the focal point, but we have customers that are using Lucy in HR, IT, sales support. Really, we're optimized around research and insights because we have all these fabulous connections to the Zappies and the Knowledge Hounds and the Euromonitors and Mintels and the like. But when it comes to internal data, we work with unstructured data. If it turns out that the stuff on SharePoint is HR documentation, or we're connected into an IT organization, into their Jira, their Confluence, their GitHub, it's just data, and the system still works really well with it.
Great. A question from Tiago, who's asking, you were talking about in your, when you were screen sharing, you were talking about the questions and typing them in. And Tiago wants to know, are those questions preset, or could you actually ask virtually anything?
You can ask anything. Actually, one of the fun things we do with prospects that are kind of late in their diligence is we'll sign an NDA. They'll send us, a dozen documents. We'll throw them in the night before. Lucy ingests them overnight. When I say throw them, we just put them in our Dropbox like it's our data in our system. We'll show some examples how Lucy works, and they'll start asking questions that a reasonable person would be able to answer if they had read those documents. And actually, that's the amazing thing with a system of natural language processing and natural language understanding. And the other thing I will set as expectations is, Lucy has her misses, But we teach people that that's okay, because we create teachable moments for our new employee and help them on their journey of getting smarter and smarter around each individual customer's data as well.
Well, fascinating. And I must be honest, we have a lot more questions coming in. Please feel free to just keep sending them, because Scott and his team will be able to get back to you after the webinar, potentially in writing, to any further questions which you may have. So let me take this chance to thank you very much, Scott, for joining us today, and of course to all of you for participating in this webinar. We really hope you've enjoyed your time with us. If you're interested in what's coming up next at SMR, then please just go to the resources widget in the console and click on the link. We have a huge amount of content that's being discussed and broadcast, so don't miss out. If you'd like to join SMR, then click on the link, also in the console, in the widget. Of course, it's needless to say that your support is absolutely invaluable to us. So from me and from Scott, we look forward to seeing you again in a future webinar. Thank you and goodbye.